a lot of what I see in athleticism at its peak form is controlling inhibition. The good athletes learn really fast. You have to treat training like learning, no longer training. There was a point at the peak of my teaching in person where I did 44 weekends in a row on the road in a different city. My reinforcement was, man, I don't know how you do it. Go to school, undergrad, go to grad school, get a doctorate, become a professional, get an education, get a job. I think there's a lot of people tell you to fall in love with the process. And I think for me personally, that would have let me fall astray. Story starts with me looking down at a plate of 6 eggs, trying to cut weight for a powerlifting meet while I was married in an apartment I couldn't afford with a job that I fucking hated, with a degree that put me in more debt. I would have recurring panic attacks and put me in the hospital. It was the anxiety that came with just running up against an error message of that old operating system, right? Because like I wasn't in a position to be comfortably down. I watched so many people die on a fence. And I watch great people die on a hill. And there's a difference.
Fuck yes. It's about time you're back in the house.
Nostalgia.
Yeah, it feels like we're sitting across from each other in 2017, just about to do some morning LSD walks.
I have no idea what you're talking from. Yeah, but neither confirm nor deny. I think that's plausible deniability. I was taught at a young age.
Oh, man. And it feels like no time has passed, yet so much time has passed. And watching you step into your purpose, it's fucking awesome. You and I had a disagreement on this, and it was great.
That sounds like us.
We had a disagreement when I said, I believe you're going to find something after this. And you're like, nope, this is all I get. This is all I'm doing. Because like for me, my journey was there's something after it, right? I found bodybuilding. I loved it. I'm like, oh, now there's a new mountain. And you're like, nope, man, I'm going to do this till the day that I die. Is that still the truth?
I think I found the essence of what I'm doing. I distilled the essence, and that's maybe aesthetically looks different, but I think the core of what I was attached to is still the same. I just didn't know how to recognize it then, and I know how to recognize it now.
Well, tell me what that looks like.
It's just problem solving and everything. I think that's what initially.
That's what I fucking told you.
Undoubtedly you have.
So literally what I said was, I'm like, I solved that problem. And now I need to solve a bigger problem. I remember verbatim. I was like, I want to solve a bigger problem. It's funny.
Yeah. I don't even remember where we were. We did that.
Really? Killian was there. Yeah, you mean Killian. We were sitting at Sparkman's Wharf at an outdoor, eating a steak.
I do recall.
Yeah, you guys got mad at me because I was like, no, man, you're both going to exit this at some point. You're going to love it. It's the best thing in the world. And then you're going to be like, I need to solve a bigger problem. Not that I'm trying to prove myself right, but it's just funny.
I mean, for me, I think I don't know if bigger, it's just different. Like, my brain is more like, I think you're more purpose-driven even still. And we could look back on this and time capsule this, and you could have another aha, I told you so moment in life.
I don't even.
My brain is more like
vindication because you're yelling at me.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's definitely yelling 6 or 7 years ago. I feel like my brain is more just like a kid with ADHD standing in front of like a fence with paint chips on it. Just like, oh, what's this one over here? But that was the essence of, like, I don't know, it feels weird to say, like, the start of my career. That was the essence that I didn't know.
That was literally the start of your career.
Right? Yeah. It would have been
post chiropractic school, but pre anything online.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, so it's the evolution of both in being in pursuit of the distillation process while simultaneously being in pursuit of that in which I'm distilling. So it's been a really interesting metacognitive adventure.
When do you get time to think?
All the time, which is like that's a question I get more often than sometimes, and I think I'm often met with that inquiry in the framing of, you seem so busy, when do you have time to think? But I feel like I spend more time inside my own head than
of course
out, right?
Yeah.
So I mean,
but there's the doing, which occupies consciousness,
right?
The absence of doing is a necessity,
yes,
to explore consciousness,
right?
And so it seems like you're always often in the doing, but you do take an extraordinary number of plane trips.
That's
just best time.
I've just recently learned of this phenomenon of people called raw dogging their flights. Are you familiar with this?
No.
It's essentially what I consider just travel to be. Like, no entertainment, no anything.
Yeah.
Sitting there staring at the back of the chair for 14. But apparently now this is some sort of cultural phenomenon made popular by some show I'm unaware of. But yeah, I think one begets the other. And I think in order to be sustainable in the art and act of doing, you run into a wall where you can't possibly do anymore until you find that release valve, until you turn it. Like I remember, and it's a muscle too, right? Like there was early in my career when I was doing seminars a little bit more periodically, like 2016, 17, just kind of getting my feet wet alongside my powerlifting career. A 1 day, 3 hour seminar, like a CrossFit box in the Bay Area, just smoked. There was a point at the peak of my teaching in person where I did 44 weekends in a row on the road in a different city. And by the time, it was a bodily function by then. But the downtime in between was so stark that like, I remember leaving London, said, you take pictures, you do your thing. I flew from Gatwick to Newark and went into the city, stayed in Manhattan for a week. And it was the Thursday or Friday following a seminar that had concluded on the Sunday prior. And I remember being at Trader Joe's on the Vatican 6 down in Soho, close to Canal Street. And I remember lady passing me the receipt for my, like pre-cooked chicken, whatever the fuck I got. And I remember going, oh, thank you. And having the conscious thought, those were the first words I spoke aloud since I got off the plane on Sunday.
Wow.
And it was just, and obviously that's an untenable way to live, right? Like isolation is prison inside of prison, right? So solitary confinement is where you send prisoners to go to suffer. So it's like, it's the balance of doing both. But I think it's been the pursuit of scratching that itch and finding that distillation that has forced me subconsciously to find that balance.
Do you think you were able to go that long because of social media? Plays an interesting role in everyone's life, doesn't it? It's like you're sort of engaged voyeuristically and you're like, oh, I can see what Don's doing and I can see what, who Jeff is doing and whoever and Jordan. And but it doesn't require me to reach out and actually have a conversation. Where if you've been left alone, actually alone for 4 days, you probably would have gone out of your way to like, maybe.
For sure. Yeah. And I think that's where I've found a lot of balance in that. For the first multiple years of my career, fear is an excellent motivator.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
I remember some fears.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, you would have been picking me up right at the time of like, I didn't know what side of the bed to piss on. And like, I was homeless when I met you. Like, I was couch surfing. God bless Presley. Like, we'll keep that story out of the podcast. Yeah. But like, I didn't have a home for years on end. Like, you'll tell the story. Dawn has stories of like, I didn't know where you were, but I knew that there were signs because packages would arrive at Drive 495. And you're like, oh, Jordan must be coming. Right. Or like, so yeah. And that was, I think creating space, both mentally and physically, for introspection is what comes on the other side of fear. So like getting, coming out the other end and being able to take a breath, looking back was like, holy shit.
Yeah. So you wanted to do that. So when I met you, I would have said, this is exactly the last 5 years, 6 years, however how long it's been, that you wanted. And you were willing to do whatever it took. And you didn't necessarily want the process, but you wanted the outcome.
Yes.
Yeah. And I know you're willing to do whatever it took. And so the process was like what you needed to go through to like, you're going to get there. Like there was no doubt you're going to get where you want to go. And now it seems like you're cusping on like, oh, it's almost like you're coming over the horizon. You're like, oh, I see the beautiful view, the vista.
Right.
And that's like, oh, I'm getting there, which is fucking beautiful, man.
I think you bring up something interesting, and I've talked a lot about that. Now, I try to not be proclamatory with advice or anything like that because I was so antithetical to that. Right? You know how resistant I was to even just you be like, hey man, have you considered like shut on 2 weeks later? But hey, I got this idea. I fucking told you that 2 weeks ago. But I think for me, it was started the train of thought, leave the station. Out of shape when that happens. Yeah, no, gone, lost it. Come on.
You started Prescript when?
2016.
16.
Yeah, fresh out of school.
And why did that start? What was the spark and what was the mission?
Necessity is the mother of all creation.
Yeah. So, but what was the mission? You're like, hey, I'm going to start this business and I know what's going to take me here. Was the mission what's come to fruition, or is it sort of a?
It's evolved for sure. I mean, the mission is always freedom, right? To my earlier point, where the train left the station, the axiom that I've become to follow is a fixation on outcome orientation. I think there's a lot of people who tell you to fall in love with the process. And I think for me personally, that would have let me falling astray because so much of the process was so arduous. I feel like I'm not masochistic. Please don't handcuff me. Please don't put burnt candle wax out on me. I don't like pain, but I love the outcome more than the pain that it took to get there. So I think a lot of what
in multiple ways.
Yeah. And for me, a lot of what I had to just come to grips with was that for the way I've solved problems, the way it was just endure. I could endure a lot, right? Like I think that is, if I had a superpower, it's like I could sit through anything if I like what's on the other side of it.
I would argue that some version of you loved every minute of it because it was this. My observation. This may not be true. My observation was it's this like pseudo celebrity glamorization of I'm on the flight again. So for some unconscious version of yourself probably was like, this is what is required, right? And that was like, I think you're unconsciously gathering joy from the fact that like, I'm on the journey and I see myself on the journey and I need to go through this. So I think even though you're like, it was arduous, which for sure it was, I think voyeuristically, you're like, this is fucking awesome.
Well, I would challenge you and go, it wasn't subconscious, it was consciously done.
Yeah.
But it was consciously the act of doing things. And my reinforcement was, man, I don't know how you do it. I don't know, like, exactly.
Right. And yeah, I don't think many things you do are subconscious. I think most things you do are beyond that. You've surpassed that in most things, I would suggest.
Yeah. I think what I learned to make that true is the effect that environment has on me and everyone. That I get to be now and have deliberately been curating environments because I understand how the environment drives my subconscious.
Does environment, tell me what environment means.
Everything, right? Everything from social media content I consume, things that I block, unfollow, right? Like your diet and your appetite for the things that you consume, both cognitively and physically. So it's
how deeply are you meta and analyzing
every day, multiple times a day. Yeah, you have to, man. Like you realize that you're not the thinker of your thoughts, right? Once you kind of tap into experience, which I think getting to do what we do, you become ever present to that idea. Like, I don't know the next thing I'm going to say, but I'm saying it, right?
Or inputs and outputs.
Yeah, for sure. But what can you control?
Well, you control the outputs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So, let's not turn this into a deterministic podcast, sure, whether or not free will exists, but it's just like, where I'm the most free and got the most lost is like, that's those 44 weeks in a row, or when I go present for 2, 3, 4, 5 days, it's like, what it takes to have a conversation where you're the only one talking, right? The presence that it takes to sit in a room of X number of people, be the only one talking, but have to converse.
I fucking love it.
It's the best.
I love it. Yeah. I love the game it is, isn't it? Like, I don't know if you view it this way, but when I'm teaching or presenting, it's this meta-analysis of every word that comes out of my mouth and every way that I say it, not just the word, and how it's going to be delivered and how it's going to be received. And I'm putting myself in their shoes in real time and getting this feedback loop of like, is this being hit? Is this hitting the way I want it to hit? It's being received and fed back to me. It's such a beautiful, it's a beautiful game. It's a child at play getting real-time feedback of like, oops, didn't hit the ball, try it again, swing this way this time. Right. Yeah.
I think for me, for a long time, it was a window into communication, but then staring at it long enough, it turned into a mirror. And that's where it kind of forces me. Yeah. And that's where and it's not so much like a stakes thing with business, although that's like definitely something I have to be cognizant of. But it's just like, I had a mentor tell me, I was interviewing for a position with an athlete, and he had a business manager who was like pretty well known in the consulting world. And we got along well. So I'm interviewing through a consultant for working with an athlete. It was quite a bizarre situation, but kind of speaks to the magnitude that or the level that the athlete was at. And he's like, where are you most confident? I'm like, when I talk to the guy at the grocery store who's bagging my groceries.
So you said?
Yeah. And he's like, that's interesting. Why? Because and I was like, because there's no consequence.
Right.
He says, because it's low stakes. And he said, do you think that? I was like, yeah, I think so. Because if I'm conversing with an agent or a manager or an athlete themselves, there's something on the line. There's something I want that they possess, and there's a transaction involved. Because what you don't realize is it's always high stakes. And even when you're conversing with the guy at the grocery store, you don't realize that it's high stakes. Yeah.
Well, it could be.
Right.
Yeah.
But he's like, you have to treat it as though it's such, right? It's a thing. It's a truth that's better off believing, even though it might not be true. Is the gun loaded? Doesn't matter. Treat it like it is loaded. There might not be empirically true, but it's practically true.
And this is, so I know we had the conversation recently around you potentially in this life, not desiring to have children.
Mm.
And, I understand why. The way your brain works, children will be a really potentially painful experience because the level of mirror and reflection and the constant reflection on I say this, they hear this is the repercussion. Your brain's going to go sideways. It's going to explode. Children have for sure, nothing comes close to being my greatest teacher because in real time, you're like, oh, there's my deficiency in communication. There's my deficiency in personality, character, and leadership. It's right. You're like,
yeah.
And they're shining a spotlight and burning a hole in your retina. And you're like, oh, I can't not see this. My personal development, there's no book that will do for you what a child will do. And it can be really painful with a level of depth of awareness. The level of guilt. Imagine I know I fucked up my kids. The level of guilt, you're like, oh, idiot, you just said that. And so there's this reciprocal thinking that is both a game and extremely painful at the same time.
Yeah, to imagine the rawness of the pure genetic component of that mirror would almost be unbearable. The fact that we all have blind spots, both technically in an optic blind spot, but also, cognitively, behaviorally. And they will show you that because they are a direct byproduct.
Yeah.
Right? This is your code. That's you might as well be showing you strands of DNA where you're see this strain here? Error.
So you've met my son, and my son has this beautiful ability to he'll say so few words and he'll throw one out there and you're you just thread the needle and cut so close to the bone.
I think that's true, Bo.
Yeah.
It's Presley has dropped a few one-liners on you where and she did that. We won't tell the story, but that one-liner she dropped on me a few years ago, she would have been 4.
Maybe 5, but close.
The type of wisdom of a mother of 3, right? It just blows my mind. But I guess, is that the upside though? When you see that,
it's all perception. It's all perception. It's your choice, right? You can, and if you choose to see it, it can be so many things, or you can choose to see nothing at all.
Right.
Yeah, I was literally thinking about you the other day, man. I think the level of joy that could come from that for you would be unmatched. And the level of pain that could come from that would be unmatched, right? And that's the irony of life, isn't it? It's you're going to get both.
Yeah.
You're going to get both. Yeah, I literally, after we left that conversation the other day, I was like, oh, man. What, of all the people that should be having children, right? At some level, that you're there. You're oh, this is the guy we want to reproduce. Not that we were.
I was going to Genghis Khan this thing, but
yeah,
that's. I mean, being at some sort of metaphorical horizon and noticing many other challenges that I think will be fruitful upon eclipsing the next. I don't see that on my radar, but I'm not writing it off entirely.
Yeah, totally, man. Dude, I always say to everyone, and then it changed forever. Right. And that's all it takes. Right. It's everyone's always waiting. I'm stop waiting.
100%.
Stop waiting.
That is definitely I'm a move fast and break shit kind of guy.
Yeah. Just fucking live.
Yeah.
Be. And so the beautiful thing about you, man, is I think since the time I met you, the quest that so many men have that I meet is authenticity. So I meet guys who are crushing it in their life, but they're unfulfilled, or, they're exceptional athletes, but there's something missing. And what it's so obvious to me, and I'm it's authenticity. You're playing a role to accomplish the outcome. Whereas with yourself, you're able to play the role, and I see you playing the role, and you're able to still integrate the authenticity, which is missing in so many people's lives. I hope you feel like you're living authentically, because that's my wish for everyone, right? I strongly consider renaming my podcast, In Pursuit of Authenticity, because ultimately, what are we all after? It's authenticity and purpose. And through authenticity, we find purpose. And so like the thing that I see in you, as I voyeuristically watch your life through social media while you're on 44 consecutive weekends, it's like, man, you're just doing the only thing your brain, no, not the only thing, the thing that your brain wanted to do. Like, it's like that's you, man. And it's fucking awesome to watch because you get to live with some incredible people, have incredible conversations, lead incredible conversations. And I just get like so much joy from watching anyone, specifically you in this case, just fucking live your life. You're like, it's you, man. It's all you. It's all every bit of it,
Yeah. I mean, that came from not doing it. Like that story starts with me looking down at a plate of 6 eggs, trying to cut weight for a powerlifting meet while I was married in an apartment I couldn't afford with a job that I fucking hated, with a degree that put me in more debt than and I had I would have recurring panic attacks and put me in the hospital. So like there was a autopilot program that was running my life up until the age of 25. That I just
from your parents or from society.
I think you know what, and this is something I learned actually from that mentor, Cheryl Mario Simon. I struggled in trading operating systems because I didn't want to resent the operating system I had. Right. So what I mean by that is like,
yeah, I get it.
Grew up in Windsor, Ontario, not the greatest place in the world. The peak of most people's, and nothing against them, blue collar town, no collar town in some cases. Like the trajectory is you work at Chrysler, Ford, GM, you make 120, which there goes a long way, or at least at the time it's you make 120 grand a year, put a Dodge Ram 1500 in the driveway, maybe a couple of Sea-Doos or a bass boat in the Detroit River, marry your high school sweetheart, have a couple of kids, live a block away from where you grew up with your parents, have a little, a nuclear family, and you live off your days until 60, retirement, you drink yourself to death. Like that's kind of
that's like 98% of the world.
Sure. Yeah. And I think my parents didn't want that for us, which then they embodied that because they left Newfoundland, a place that was much worse off, especially when they grew up. They were the only ones of their family that had left. And to me, for
people blessed them.
Yeah, no, for sure. My mom was one of 5. My mom is one of 5. Now 4. My dad is one of 8, and they're the youngest and the only of their siblings to leave the island to have a life their own. Yeah. But so for me, the idea of like the nuclear family, go to school, undergrad, go to grad school, get a doctorate, become a professional, get an education, get a job, was something that up until the very point that it happened, the pursuit of that was instantly gratifying at every point. It got me out of Windsor, it got me into Toronto got me to California, but it was an operating system, right? They uploaded it for me and it allowed, but it was time to update the operating system. And I struggled with that right up until the point where my subconscious anxiety like almost killed me. And like honestly at the time, dude, I'm gonna be totally honest with you, I started my powerlifting career, I thought I was having a heart attack. I thought I trend blasted my fucking heart into oblivion. Mm-hmm. And I had 2 clients at the time. I had more than 2, but the 2 clients I had were integral in the story. One is a cardiothoracic surgeon at Stanford that works in the ICU. He like heads up that department in the School of Medicine. He's a teacher, professor. He's actually from Toronto of all places. And I went to him, I was like, Paul, I had a really like scary morning, and I was going to admit myself in the hospital. And he was like kind of aware of my let's call it nefarious sport-related activities. He said, get the fuck in here. So I got an echocardiogram on the floor of the ICU in Stanford University. He pulled me into no insurance, no nothing. Hopefully, Paul, this doesn't get you in trouble. And he pulls me into an intern's sleeping quarters where fellows will sleep on night shifts of bunk beds. The guy is sleeping on the bunk bed at the top. So he pulls an echo off of the floor, pulls me in with another intern. I'm shirt off. Guys waking up, rolling over the thing. Hey, what's going on here? Paul is doing an echocardiogram on my heart and making sure I don't have any myriad of drug-related, maladies that someone could have in my position. Does an EKG. He did a 13-lead EKG on my heart outside of the president of the Stanford University Hospital's office on a conference table. Oh, this massive oaks 20-seater conference table, and I'm there, shirt off, bunch of leads, EKG. I still have the report. And at the end of it, he's just I had another client named Catherine Sandborn. Sorry, I guess not all folks with opportunity names. And he's like, I think you need to go see Catherine. She's the head of clinical psychiatry. And he's like, your heart is fine. Actually, I wish you were a patient of the hospital so I could show what a healthy heart looked like. And it was the anxiety that came with just running up against an error message of that old operating system, which was inauthentic.
Have you considered that was, what's your term? You have a term.
Boy.
You have a term you use or a phrase that you use. That was, I'm not going to remember it, but a feature, not a book.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Oh, 100%. Yeah. I think heeding, there's warning signs that, like, to me, I feel lucky that the warning sign just quite literally hit me over the head. Right. Because, like, I wasn't in a position to be comfortably numb. Like, there's, I heard on Chris Williamson's podcast, they probably talk about it like maybe once a week, the region beta paradox of things would be better if they were worse.
Yeah.
Right. So, like, if you were in situations so bad, you had to change.
It's like good is the enemy of great.
Right. And so for me, it was just like, I was approaching this comfortably numb, I make enough money to pay the bills. I'll pay off my loans. I could calculate how many patients I'd have to see over what period of time to get out of debt. Wife at the time had a good job as well, but, like, it's not at all what I wanted. And I was lucky enough that things got really bad really quick. And, like, the mallet hit me over the head and I was in the hospital and the physician was like, it's not your heart. I wish it was, because then I wouldn't really have to realize so acutely how cooked my head was.
So, woo Ben is going to throw something. Like, I always say it's like your soul speaks to you in whatever language you need to hear. And this was the kick in the ass you needed to be like, this is not your path. You could, whatever reason is behind it, I'm like, your soul knows the way, man. You're so intelligent. Like, you process things so quickly. Like, you just knew at the level of your soul and you just weren't listening. And your soul is like, nope. Like, you can call it whatever you want. They're the voice inside your head, And for some people it's a whisper, and some people it's a scream, and some people it's like, hey, go to the hospital. Like, you need to change it. And you're so lucky that you got to find that at the age you did, not when you're fucking 60 years old. Like, a lot of people, and they're like, I don't want to live anymore. I don't want to be here anymore because I don't think I have a chance anymore. Right? Imagine that happening at 60 years old. It's like, yeah, it's not the path. And I hope people out there who are 60 years old listening are like, no, you could still find your way. But yeah, it's interesting, man. I really believe that we all find our way, whether we, maybe not we all, but many people find their way, whether they want to or not. Yeah.
I think there's a way to do it in a less painful way.
Not for you?
No, not for me. But the thing, and I think the reason I say that is the inundation of, let's be real, the inundation of clips from podcasts that go viral in some pursuit of trying to motivate or inspire. It's just like, that's not how this worked for me. And I think for more often than sometimes, the way it works is not, like, the word inspire is really interesting. Like, I've really taken to, in my ample free time in between bouts of not shutting the fuck up, I've really taken to the study of etymology, like, not what words mean,
right?
Which is, like, ironic because my nickname in primary school was Webster, because I used to walk around with a dictionary.
Really?
Yeah. When I was a small kid, word glass is easy to pick on, but I had a sharp tongue, because that was my defense mechanism.
Right.
I was like a tree frog. I was like, yeah, go ahead, lick me. I'll fuck you up. Like, I will fuck you up. Then I grew into being a little more physically capable, but I liked the linguistic side. I liked being able to dismantle someone up here first, because that's where it really hurts. Right?
Yeah, fuck yeah.
But I evolved change to etymology and, like, looking at where things come from, and, like, the inspirational things. And inspire is to breathe life to something. Like, that's not a podcast clip, though.
No.
Like, that's watching and experiencing, right? So it's like, I'm cautious to the tale of pain not being the thing, because I don't want people to think that that's how they have to do it. Because I was so often pulled in different directions and looking in the wrong places for that inspiration as I was traversing my way through. And I think the advising people to be cautious of how they get their advice or their inspiration by understanding what it means to be inspired.
Interesting. I don't, yeah. So what comes to mind as you say that is, to be inspired is often not subtle, right? Like, I think to take massive action doesn't take subtle stimulus, right? So many people are taking these subtle bouts of inspiration off podcasts and social media. Like, that's not going to cause inspiration. That's often going to cause distraction, right? Like, what is motivation if not in the right direction, but a distraction? So it's interesting just to kind of navigate what actually causes inspiration in people who do great things to follow that, right? And great things is very subjective, very subjective. But I think it's like living your best life. Well, how can you define that and say, like, hey, I got inspired to pursue me, in an authentic form, to pursue what's breathing life into me, and that's a beautiful, following your definition of words. That's a beautiful path.
I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head with the action thing, right?
Of course.
Because that's the inputs and outputs that we talked about earlier. Like, if you have a pedestrian understanding of reward systems, you understand how that you can use actions to what set me astray out of the gate was, and it's funny because coming up with a more humanities background, I started studying history and political science before I got into kinesiology. And I remember Kramer 101, philosophy, University of Windsor, Letty lecture hall, maybe. I may be fucking that up for going back like 15, 20 years. Very charismatic lecturer. I had no interest in philosophy or psychology as a, junior hockey playing a meathead 18-year-old personal trainer bouncer. Like, as unaware of a combination of traits as a human being could have.
Right.
Like, to anyone who grew up in Canada, they know exactly the brand of douchebag that it was, right? Like, worked at a Good Life Fitness, worked at
I think we were like living mirrored lives.
Oh my God. So it's just like, but I remember the lecture, listening to him go through Cartesian dualism. And like, it's been a blessing to me to start to, even from a professional and technical standpoint, in talking about the body and movement and biomechanics and all that. When I started to see how my worldview influenced the way I thought about the things that I teach or the things that I'm interested in, it was like, it was 50-50. Now it's probably 90-10 exploring the worldview, because I think I've come really far on the action piece to kind of our conversation of like, I've only since in the last couple of years realized how Cartesian dualism of mind and body has really set me off course to where I am now. And the paradigm that I've adopted and the worldview that I've adopted, not only to help guide me professionally in the way that I talk about the mind and the body and how they interact and how we work with them as practitioners in various disciplines, but also just, I mean, I'll sample from your language, and I think it's probably, I've adopted this language more wholeheartedly in our last 6 years of being ships passing the night, but spiritually as well, that the dualism isn't in mind and body. The dualism is between mind and brain, and understanding how the voluntary conscious mind is a user interface for the much more complicated brain itself, right? Like, I think of how many websites have you made in your life? Like countless, right? The number of Squarespace, WordPress, Wix. And early days, and you would have been one of the earliest fitness people to probably have to solve these problems, is, I remember WordPress.com websites were a nightmare. And I remember coming across the first back-end editor where it was like, we take for granted the Squarespaces and the Shopifys and the click and drags. But it's like, my worldview has switched from like the dualistic mind-body paradigm to a dualism of mind and brain. And understanding that, look, yes, the back-end CS of a fucking Shopify is unbelievably complex. Why? Because I hire a dev team of engineers to customize it every now and then. I have them go in and go, okay, look, I don't want this button here. I want this to be green or whatever. Oh, well, sorry, the theme doesn't allow for that. I don't give a fuck, dude. Go in and write some code in the matrix and make it happen. That's the brain. But I can interface so seamlessly with a back-end editor or developer where I can just click and drag shit. And people are like, oh, wow, you made that website? It's like, yes, I made the website. It's fucking click and drag. A 4-year-old could do it. But I think now, and the idea is that in myself, when I don't feel inspired, but I understand the technical reward systems of the brain, dopamine, all of that, but I don't need to know all that. I don't need to know the CS. I need to know what to click and drag. And for me, it's always an action, right? It's the inputs that drive the outputs. It's the sensory that drives the motive, right? So in being able to like break that paradigm down and adopt a new type paradigm of like mind and brain, and I'm very much pedestrian in the depths of neuroscience. I know a little bit about a little bit. I like knowing more. It's a field of study that I'm interested in. But I almost am more interested in coming through the user interface and being like, okay, what code does this change back here when I do this? Because this is my whole world. This is the world we all interact with. This is the world that I'm teaching, right? This is the world where if we're going to make change, it's at the level of the back-end editor that's click and drag. So I try and look through this when I run into error messages to see, all right, what is the background code here? But I think people are in looking to find inspiration. It's the movement on the editor, right? It's the movement in the mind that drives the back-end change in the brain. But you don't need to know this. You just need to start clicking and dragging shit.
And when you say that, you mean taking specific action and measuring outcomes?
I think just taking action, period. I watched so many people die on a fence. And I watched great people die on a hill. And there's a difference. We sit on the fence and we just hedge and we hedge. And it's like, the consequence of getting something wrong is not nearly as severe as the consequence of not making the decision.
1,000%. Yeah, I actually play that game with my team pretty much every day. I'm sort of the asshole who's like, you're just not going fast enough. Like, do this now, get it done by the end of the day. And everyone's like, no, it's not possible. I'm like, it's possible. Figure it out. Like, and so Tim Ferriss would say, like, what would this look like if it was easy? Like, yeah, like, it's not hard. You just haven't figured out the right operating system yet. Interesting thoughts. What comes to mind as you're saying that is optically, you're someone who takes consistent action, whether or not that's reality or optics. Your outputs are measurable. Your outputs are significant. Would you say your inputs, meaning the action you're taking on a consistent basis, is something you're proud of, meaning pretty great? Like, I'm disciplined with my inputs. I'm disciplined with my action. Or, meaning the reason I'm going with that in that direction is where I want to go is what drives that? What drives the action? Or do you think the outputs are a measure of the work you've done years ago? Does that make sense? Like, am I taking disciplined action every day consistently now, therefore my outputs are exceptional and measurable? Or is it the work I've done up to this point or up to 5 years ago that I'm just sort of now manifesting?
I'm inclined to say the latter. This is a manifestation of the hard work
In the past?
in the past. However, being acutely aware of that drives the daily discipline to future-proof and invest into this unit of time that's elapsed between my harvest of these seedings.
Tell me how you do that.
That's a great question. How do I do that on a daily basis?
Yeah. Do you just fit it in where it fits?
No.
Do you plan it? Do you clear your calendar? Because, man, I know what it looks like to have a calendar that's like, I'm squeezing in 15 minutes of like, I got to read this book. I want to get it done by the end of the week. And I'm like listening to a podcast over here while I'm replying to clients over here while I'm like getting ready to pick my kids up over there. I know how that looks.
So the answer is that it finds me. Like, I know when I'm on, and I'm living this right now. Like, my last 8 weeks have been, even by my standards, abnormally hectic.
Full court press.
And my brain just wakes me up.
It's like, hey, you need to do something.
Yeah. And it's the same. It's a muted, more attenuated version of that sweating on my eggs, panic attack moment.
It's standard.
It's a standard. Yeah. I think, look, one of my favorite quotes, and Killian Hamilton, who really drilled this and brought it to my attention years ago.
I love it.
He's the most spiritual guy you've ever met, who would just deny it and denounce it outrightly.
Right.
But the quote, it's a Kierkegaard quote that goes, "Anxiety is the dizziness of freedom." And I think here's the odd part is, and I remember a mutual friend of ours years ago, Nick Mitchell, he asked me once what my preeminent value was. And I said freedom. And I think and I said it without even thinking or ever having the thought of what I valued before. And that's ultimately and it remains to be true today. But in the pursuit of that, and in some ways, the accomplishment of that, like, relatively free of time and space. anxiety is a dizziness of freedom. So in order to keep that on the rails, I just wake up early.
What does freedom mean? So is freedom a root of growing up in Windsor and being like, I don't have the money I want, I don't have the house I want, I don't have the life I want. So my brain is going to fabricate some false belief that if I have money, the house, and the job I want, then I'm actually free.
No, because I think, and this is where when you made that point about people who find it at 60, people who run into that impasse, that inauthentic crossroads of like, oh fuck. That's where I think I'm a get, because I had to figure out that piece early, right? Because it wasn't a money thing, right? I was stable enough, more stable at that point than I had been in my entire life. So why then was I knocked off the horse, right? So I was forced to figure out that piece early. That like, I think it's not Vivek, who is it? Naval Ravikant says, if you can't be happy with a cup of coffee, you'll never be happy on a yacht or something like that. Mm-hmm. So it's not a money thing. It's not a pursuit.
No.
Yeah. Freedom, I think, is honestly for me, it was about like authority. I think I've always, and I don't know where it comes from, but I've always struggled with authority. Huh. You're talking to a guy.
I think it's a man thing.
You think?
Yeah.
Huh.
I think so. Like a masculinity thing. Like think of like, sounds very chauvinist, but or maybe like a strong, confident man. Who do I want to rule me? Like myself?
That's interesting. So I'm not, I hate phrasing things this way. I'm not disagreeing with you because I've had a similar thought of late, because when you start to conquer these externalities of things that rule you, right? Like I don't have to report to anyone. Like now I have business partners that I have a tremendous amount of respect for, and I'm in constant seek of their opinion. That's why they're in the position they're in, adjacent to me in my life. But like, I think the luxury that freedom has afforded. So here's the thing, and this is another Naval thing, and it's not peace of mind, it's peace from mind. And I think where that's led me is like, for a really long time, and even still to as of this morning, like you end up as like a victim of your own thoughts, right? So like for me, it's just been like, how do I just get free?
What's the for instance this morning?
Oh, just like, waking up to a couple of emails, some unanswered text messages, and like becoming your thoughts, right? Like, because at first it's like, you're raised by people who go to work every day for a boss. It's like, well, I can't see my parents all the time because their boss is keeping them late. My father, remember Y2K?
Yeah.
So my dad worked for the city of Windsor, electrical power and wind energy Windsor. My father couldn't spend New Year's with us in 2000 because his boss was worried that something about the ones and zeros and the extra zero of 2000 was going to like crack. Like,
well, the whole world was afraid of
right. But it's like, I couldn't spend New Year's Eve with my father because his boss, so he couldn't be there. Right. And my parents did a tremendous job. Like literally if you call their house, I don't know if the voicemail is still set up, but my entire childhood, if you call their house and it rung through their voicemail, it was my father saying, you've reached blah, 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 970. We're either at the pool or the arena or somewhere in between. My sister swam, I played hockey. So they did a great job, but it's like, I was never, the limited resource that is your parents was limited to me by a lack of freedom. So it's like, but I overcame that.
It's so fascinating being a dad to hear your perception of your childhood, knowing how my kids perceive things now. And the stories they create are based on such a small fraction of their reality, generally the negative fraction of their reality. The things they remember and stand out. My son tells a story of when I dropped him in the pool. And I was like, that's not true. You know that? He goes, yeah, that it is. I was like, no, it's not. Do you want to know what actually happened? So you create these like you're just saying, your dad was there 99 or however much percent later. That one time you're like, ah, and that shapes your whole reality for the next 40, 35 years. Fascinating. Is that sort of the...
Yeah, and you know what? I think it's nature and nurture. Like both of my parents, by the very, like by where I'm standing now, I'm a byproduct of defiance. Both the youngest of their families, respectively, on an island where, frankly, most people don't leave.
And you would have heard that growing up, right?
Actually, and this is like, God love my parents. It's like, I never knew we were poor, and I never knew that they were. Now, my mom is like, I can tell the personality traits of where I get like the empathetic communication side I get from my dad, the claws I get from my mom.
Huh.
Like if someone needs to get told where to go and how to get there, that's Louise Shallow. I might as well just be like a fucking sock puppet. Like I understand that. But for me, it was just like, so I think it was part nurture in like, I saw these environments where things were limited at the hands of others and I didn't want that. And I could only imagine how that affected them. And we moved around when we were young because I gotta find a new job, well, that sucks. I don't want to be at the whim of someone else. I'm at the whim of someone who's at the whim of someone. I don't like it. I don't want that. But then nature-wise, watching primarily my mom interact with people, it's like my dad used to leave. Someone would come fix the toilet or something and would try and haggle. My dad's like, he's an understanding guy. My dad would go to the bar. Guy would walk in, some slick talking Italian dude there, and he would joke right to my dad, knowing that he could sucker his way out of not doing it today or more money or whatever. And my dad was like, see you later, man. And my mom would sit there and just be like, you're gonna get this done fucking 20 minutes ago. So I think it's equal parts, but it's a positive feedback loop for me. Like I almost got kicked out of primary school, high school, undergrad, and grad school.
Full of sharp tone.
Yeah. I think it's just like, I don't know if standing your ground to the authenticity conversation comes in, but like I was positively reinforced that like, and I don't like going down the road of like, if something's yours, you go take it. But at a certain point, you have to dig your heels in.
Man, what else is life than a pursuit of that which you want? The ideal reality is yours for the taking or creating or not. And I wake up every day and I say to my kids, someone's going to create your reality. It might be you and it might not be, but it's your choice.
Right.
That's it. So like, if you're like, hey, I want that to be my reality, fucking go get it. And that can go off
Sure.
the rails a little
Right.
bit, but like you're pursuing your desired outcome by whatever means necessary within the realm of the law. But that's not so bad.
Yeah, but I think from where that's led me now, and the final boss forever will be that the thing holding you back to you.
Oh,
Right. But I think that's a luxury. I think that's,
how do you hold yourself back?
I mean, some of it is just, most of it now is just distraction.
Inevitably, right?
Right.
The better you get, the harder she gets.
But
Do you know that? Do you know the Ramosi? So
I don't.
Sir
God bless him. But
Sir Ramosi uses the Matrix, the lady in the red dress.
okay.
Do you know the reference?
Yes.
So there's a lady in the red dress where Neo turns around and he watches the lady walk by and it turns into the Terminator agent or not,
Yeah.
but like the more successful you become, the better the opportunities become.
Sure.
So she's the representation of the opportunity. And you're like, now that I'm making this opportunity looks like this. So that, it's like one size up. And every time I get better, the opportunity becomes that much bigger and greater that you have to be even more disciplined and focused and not get distracted by the thing that's pulling your attention away. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's, for most of my life, I was a person walking around thinking thoughts. Like when you realize that the straightest way to not being pulled in that distraction is that there's no discernible difference between the thinker and the thought. And once you start experiencing things, that's when things start to flow right. And you make those decisions without distraction and devoid of a decision to even be made, right? Like I think it's really, we have this veritas view of our own life. And now its dimensions worse because of social media and this curated distance. But most people, like as they look at their Instagram profile, they see the separation. But what they don't actually see is that same separation, maybe even a more potent one, exists between the voice in their head and them as an avatar in their own life. Right? It's like, that is my final boss now. After telling off enough teachers and enough people, I realized that the real authoritarian in my head is this spastic thing that doesn't shut the fuck up. Right? So learning not how to control it, but just to recognize it, that for me has been like the number one thing, kind of to your earlier question of like, okay, we're at this juncture where you may be reaping the benefits of your hard work from 5-6 years ago, but you're also at the precipice of a new horizon. How do you manage both? Or what is the inspiration? What is the discipline required to move towards that? The discipline required now for me is the final boss inside my own head and just being present in the experience of being not being my thoughts. I think is probably the aim that I have now.
How often are you doing that in real time? 3 times a day. Like I'm having a conscious experience and then I'm allowing my
Oh no, I would say 3 or 4 times a day and having some sort of concerted space. away from to like reset.
So my question was, you're having these conscious thoughts, and it's checking in with the final boss to go like, hey, am I on the right track here, or am I going offline? Like, how's that?
The checking in process is antithetical to the goal. It's the separation of having thoughts and being thoughts. I think
What does being thoughts mean? It's eating your
so if I'm having a thought, that the goal is not to be my thoughts. Like if I'm having a negative thought, if I woke up this morning, it's like shit ton of emails and some people that needed to fucking answer me and didn't. And it's just like, I'm mad because of my thoughts about the email. But it's like, I'm not my thoughts. Right. So it's the checking in process is as many times as I get pulled into becoming my thoughts.
So it's going from a thought to an embodiment, and you're checking the road between the thought and the embodiment and going, no, that doesn't have to be, wired in deeper, cut in deeper, so to speak.
Right. It's like imagine driving in traffic and seeing a car merge in. It's like, notice the thought merge in and then watch it dissipate away. It's just, but like for so long, my operating system was and that's the final boss for me. It's like, you're always in traffic.
So my language is embodiment. Does that resonate with you? Like it goes from a thought to an embodiment, like an emotion. Well, you call it what you want, but yeah, it could be an emotion, or it could just be an embodiment, which is some physical realization, some physical manifestation of a thing that's going on in my head.
I think if I were to use the word embodiment, it would have to be something without my conscious awareness. So one of those thoughts becomes intrusive by proxy of not being aware of it. Because there are things where like someone said something to me the other morning. I thought about it. I recognized the thought coming in and thought, I'm going to fucking lay into this guy. And I did. And it was great. But it wasn't reactive. It was think and then act. Right. So I think anything where the present experience isn't in my control, it's in the control of the thinker of the head or thinker inside the head. That for me that's what I'm fighting against.
Who drove that level of conscious awareness for you? Has there been like a teacher, a mentor, a book that allowed you to think about the thinker?
Yeah, probably a handful of books. I've gone through like the religious triad a few times. I've read those, and those have been
Which has been the most impactful?
The Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think anytime the further you go east, the more, Buddhism is probably going to be in a league of its own as far as driving awareness.
Do you ever think about the fact that, so you spend time in the equivalent of third world countries?
Sure. Yeah.
I always think about the fact that we're putting so much weight into these like ancient civilizations that were certainly nowhere near as civilized as these third world countries currently are. It seems. I'm like, that's an interesting, I can't reconcile in my head. I'm like, what was life actually like when Lao Tzu was writing Via the Art of War? Like, was he actually some like enlightened dude, or was he just some weird like loner, sketchy guy sitting in a temple somewhere? I can't because or at least my reality that I exist in paints the reality that they live in, right? So like a couple thousand years ago, what did their daily operating system look like? Education was like almost nil as far as the percentage of people in the world. It seems. I could be wrong. I sometimes try to reconcile in my mind. We're taking the life guidance and we're saying this is the end all and be all from people who, I don't know what their reality was like every day.
See, I look at it the opposite. I think people like that metaphorically could see the stars. Well, we're trying to traverse the astrology, the astronomy with so much light pollution. I hear you. Like I think I'm not a huge dog. I just relative to the amount of stuff that I've consumed, stoicism is not super high on my. I think if we were to base modern culture off of the text, I would probably go with something like Marcus Aurelius' Meditations over the Old Testament or some of the other religious texts. But like, is it easier to see the stars without the light? And like metaphorically, how much light pollution do we have now?
Right. So here's where I go with this. People born a few thousand years ago, prior to cities, prior to any type of technology, certainly, but certainly the ability to interact with large numbers of people, would have an unadulterated expression of their human consciousness. So they would be able to just like walk out in nature and like experience. But their who's influencing their thinking, right? So is it their parents? Is it their community? If a child is born into the jungle, their nature is influencing their experience. Yeah. The purist in me wants to say that's the most unadulterated human that can exist. They're seeing the stars without the light pollution, right? But they're one step removed from being a monkey at that point. You're like, well, so how do I reconcile that in my head? Like, are they actually a monkey, or are they actually the most enlightened version of a human that could possibly exist, because they're coming from creation and then no one is there to tell them anything. They're just this pure, beautiful human.
Well, I think survival being what it was, evolution is going to be more like, we look at nature and nurture now, and it can be a bit of a toss-up, where we can clearly delineate where one comes from or where traits are adopted or they're inherited. I think back then was just how difficult it was to be alive logistically, that what propagated was that immediately acted as a fitness function in evolution, which now is not the case, right? So I think what you're seeing, whether it's philosophically, whether it's religiously 2,000, 3,000 years ago, those are fitness functions that are proving to be useful in an immediate generation, right? Like, why did the finch adopt a certain beak style? It's because it survived.
Right.
Why did people adopt philosophies, and where did they learn how to? It's like they would have inherited that as a fitness function of their evolution. And I think evolution was a much more concentric circle of a feedback loop then, because you had such a turnover of life and death. Now lifespan is what it is. Not to say that people didn't live long back then, but just the population was constantly being recycled. Where now is population is of a crisis, but evolution is a crisis as well. But you could argue that in the last 200 years, let's say maybe the last 100 years, with the advancements in safety, like even just like starvation. Like, at what rate are we pulling people out of abject poverty and starvation no longer be outside, like maybe Venezuela and parts of the Congo? Like, that alone was a driver of like, hey, if we figured something out, whether, cognitively or spiritually, that helped us survive. So I'm more to I think nature and nurture, it had to have been nature, because the nurture process for so many people was so short, but the concentric feedback loop of the nature component of evolution was so potent, which made, when you had this confluence of religions coming out of basically the latter half of the Roman Empire, when Christianity sort of take off, and that led to Islam and so forth, and obviously Judaism preceding those. Clearly, the fitness function of organized evolution had an evolutionary utility that allowed people to propagate. So that's kind of my take on the philosophical religious utility at the time. And I think that just carried us so far further than you could argue we would have gone without it.
I think everyone thinks like, these guys are definitely on LSD right now.
Could you imagine if we were? We were probably talking about bicycle.
Let's take a break. You said something to me yesterday in the gym that I think people would find interesting, not philosophical, training related. Okay. I'm going to mess this up. But we were talking about fixing my hip, and you said sagittal, transverse, frontal, in that order?
Frontal. So
frontal first, then sagittal.
Yeah.
Frontal's first?
So sagittal, frontal, transverse.
Transverse.
Yeah.
Give me more.
Yeah. As physics intersects with biomechanics and neuromuscular physiology, it seems like we run out of options in that reverse order. So like the way I illuminate this, because essentially it's a regression model. Like,
yeah, I understand.
If I were to take, I think a good anchor point for this is Stu McGill's Big Three, right? Everyone's probably familiar. If you're not, Canadian spine researcher, does a lot of work with spines, low back.
When you guest on the podcast, went to his house. Have you met him?
I have, yeah.
Just an incredible.
It's always really strange to me, growing up as a Canadian, being in the field that I'm in, seeing Stu and him like waving and coming by. I say, I think it's a really like surreal.
Yeah,
and he's also speaks to him as
he's like a celebrity, but he also makes himself just such a accessible, amazing, kind human.
Yeah. He's he coined these three exercises that were kind of pillars or cornerstones of core exercise in the offsetting of risk likelihood of low back pain. And it was a bird dog can curl up in the side plank, right? But if you look at those exercises categorically, you go, well, a bird dog is an anti-transverse plane, anti-rotation exercise at its core, no pun intended, right? You have this offset, staggered hand and knee stance position, which when you run the math on it, it's gonna rotate around this axis. Side plank is obviously frontal, and the curl up is sagittal. And when you do this for like long enough, when you do this for any length of time, and you deploy those exercises to people to which they may be useful, meaning that like they're far enough regressed either in the pain they're experiencing or in their physical ability, you start to see that the sagittal plane curl up stuff is usually met with a fair bit of competency right out of the gate. Maybe not the most amount of endurance or intensity or anything, but usually if I have to weigh these things, someone's going to be reproducibly good at a curl up, less good but not terrible at a side plank, and usually worse off and you start to see that trend across the board. And look no further than your ESPN highlights, right? Like if we kind of take a few training stimuli, and so let's take a sagittal plane, frontal plane, and transverse plane as a progression of training stimuli, right? I can train. To maybe an example of this as a training stimuli would be the following. My great grandma, God rest her soul, she died at 106. By the time that she was towards the latter years of her life, watching her walk was like kind of watching a cross country skier. She sort of just had this like somehow she was shuffle. The shuffle was really an expression of her lack of movement options, right? An inability to break through any other plane in the sagittal. It was the simplest for her to organize. It was where she was stronger and had the best chance of the bipedal hominid to overcome gravity, right? I thought still walking was she was tremendous, like really an interesting person. But to watch that was like looking back going, how the fuck are you doing that?
Right.
But then you watch, people in our world, bodybuilders, and you watch them run. They evolve from a shuffle to a walk, which is much more this like global frontal plane expression of a limited group of movement options. Because you think about the way they train, one thing is they're not training a lot is the transverse plane. They're not doing a lot of rotational stuff because it just doesn't serve them in their purpose, at least in the short term, to put on muscle, mechanical potential, all that shit. So, but then you watch someone like Usain Bolt. So here we have this bipedal ambulation on this continuum of unlimited variability and expression to very limited and invariable expression. And you see how we move from sagittal frontal to transverse plane. And that progression is true across the board, right? So if I'm teaching someone, like, I've trained God knows how many people in my life. I remember training an elderly client when I was living in Palo Alto. And we would dose the bird dog more frequently during the week because he needed more exposure to it, because he was already kind of good at the baseline sagittal plane stuff, because so many of his limited movement options existed in the sagittal plane. The way he defaulted to walking, the way he defaults to like carrying things was always him putting himself in an orientation where he could express his force production in the in the sagittal plane, right? So it's an interesting heuristic to have in your back pocket when you're looking to solve problems. So let's take the example of your shoulder and hip, right? So if we look at the hip, it's like so often we see limitations in range of motion expressed through a decrease in the transverse plane, right? I'm lacking shoulder rotation. I'm lacking hip rotation. Shoulder external, hip internal. More often than not, even though there's likely limitations, more often limitations in the other direction. But we see that and we go to that first. I'm going to improve hip internal rotation by doing hip internal rotation. Sorry, man. Like, it's not that simple. At least when we are looking for long-standing changes, at least when we're looking to sample the analogy, like how do we sample movement to speak to the user interface, or how do we use the user interface to speak to the hardware, right? We may not know the source code, but if we have a click and drag menu that's logical and reproducible, and then we can kind of refresh the page and see like, oh, okay, now we're actually making lasting changes, because the people who come in and consistently are doing this to improve external, or consistently doing the floor hacky sack maneuver to improve hip internal rotation. It's like they just do that now. That's an error message.
It never gets better.
Ever. Because there's other planes at play that are deficient, that are leading you to this very visible expression of inefficiency in the system, right? So that's a very easy way to triage and troubleshoot. So it's like, we look at the femoral acetabular joint, we think we're not getting enough movement here. It's like, this thing moves too. It should move, right? So are we getting enough frontal plane pelvic movement to support that part of the joint's role in facilitating the transverse plane movement of the femur in that joint? And so it's a really useful heuristic for solving problems. Because like here we have two examples. I'm putting together a training program for a novice client. Should I do like a Russian twist core exercise? Like, high velocity transverse plane movement, right? What are you, that Matt McClune guy? The guy who does like all the dunks? Like that's high velocity transverse plane.
That guy's unbelievable.
Yeah, dude.
He's short.
Shorter.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, the jumping is compensatory, right?
Crazy.
Yeah. But to my point, high velocity transverse plane movements are really hard. That's why we value them. Throwing a baseball, hitting a baseball, a big serve in tennis, all of the things that are on your highlight reels, top 10, ESPN, TSN, wherever you're from, they're high velocity transverse plane movements, right? I've never once seen a power lifter, a low velocity, high intensity, sagittally plane dominant movement, a top 10 of any sports highlight reel, unless the highlight reel was themed after the most boring things in sports, right? So it's like, we can look at that heuristic and solve so many problems with it, right? From a rehabilitation standpoint, like lack of paternal rotation. Okay, do you have frontal plane pelvic movement? You lack shoulder rotation. Does your scapula and or rib cage move through the frontal plane? Right? Can we obtain and maintain a certain position or control in that plane? So it's easy. And then you go from your shoulder, your hip to your grandma. And you can use this framework to put a chip on the board to just see if you're fucking right. And I think it's...
Yeah. So is it simple enough to say, the lowest level of progression is sagittal plane, then progressing to the frontal plane, then progressing to the sagittal plane, once you sort of can control yourself through those?
Sure.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, it's something like, if I had, I've strained my pec, tore my pec, I've run into issues, weightlifting, sports, living life, and it's something that I can so easily pull off the shelf. Right? Oh, my pec feels a little bit weird. Okay, like, well, what does a pec do? It flex adducts and internally rotates the shoulders. Well, maybe I'm not going to do all three of those. Maybe I'm going to first just train the pec through. Now, there's a caveat to this that transverse plane motion is always kind of present, right? And this, you have to be,
It almost has to be, right?
it has to be, right? The ball and socket, even just sliding surfaces in general. Like if I do a front raise, like say I do a dumbbell front raise, common and medial anterior delt exercise, depending on how you do it. We look at, if I have my arm down my side and then my arm kind of at 90 degrees, we see that as 90 degrees of flexion, arm to the side to arm at 90 degrees. But if you take my thumb as kind of a proxy to rotation of the shoulder, I've gone through 90 degrees of rotation. Well, we're just so used to this being a short lever rotation that's very apparent to us. But my point being is like, if I'm trying to, my knee or hip is bothersome, I'm going to come back after a pain. It doesn't feel good. I'm just going to, okay, can I just go through this first before I start opening up into abduction, which is frontal plane, or external to internal rotation, which is going to be a little bit more complex. So they're both at like the tissue level, like the arthrokinematic level, the joint level, and also this. Things get simpler as you go more sagittal, and things get more complex as you go more into frontal transverse.
Have you run into any circumstances where something is so deeply wired in somebody's nervous system, not from a, like a joint perspective, but something so deeply wired that you couldn't reverse some movement dysfunction?
It's tough because a lot of movement, like asymmetries, can be just reinforced by muscular tone and strength, cross-sectional area. Right. So it's going to be a matter of equilibrating left versus right. Because a lot of times when we look at insufficiencies in movement, we're a lot of time looking at asymmetry. Right?
Muscular asymmetries.
Well, or neuromuscular asymmetries, right? The patterning here. So I think...
Right. Can you correct that? Can you correct a neuromuscular asymmetry?
Sure. Yeah. Because you have to, the trick is you have to treat training like learning, no longer training. And that's where people get tripped up.
Yeah.
Right. You have to use principles pedagogical principles of teaching.
Does that extend out the time horizon? It seems as though it's like, because people are looking for this, right? Like, I need to be able to today. Well, if I'm teaching new movements or learning moving patterns,
Right.
the time horizon is very different in my mind.
So depends on who you're working with.
Yeah.
And I think that's, if I were to define what makes an athlete, it's an ability to learn motor skills quickly.
That's true.
Right? Like I always draw the comparison between like really good athletes and cognitive savants, right? Cognitive, like a Kim Peek, Rain Man, for example, that can read,
They'll just get it.
they just learn fast, right? And I think the difference between a good athlete and a great athlete is someone that can learn fast. And in the gym, if you think about relative to like learning, like if I take a running back, like, I work with some pretty special athletes that specialize in that discipline. When I think about what it is I'm trying to teach them in the gym versus what it is they need to learn in real time, the amount of inputs they're processing with, 11 guys on their team, 11 guys on the other team, a couple of refs, 100 and something thousand people in the stands, a couple $1 million that game. And, oh yeah, hey, by the way, those guys over there, yeah, they're trying to kill you. Right. And I go like, all right, man, we're going to put one foot up here. We're going to elevate this. I want you to hold on to this. Like, the good athletes learn really fast. And I think when we start looking at dysfunction, we have to treat it like a hardware issue. And we need to learn how to interface it with this very palatable, easy to use operating system, or this dashboard, this UI UX. So it's like, I think the time horizon, you're right. It is different, but it's actually quicker because learning, for those who know how to learn fast, is much faster.
Man, never is that more apparent than my children to watch like the rate of skill acquisition variability between them. Very different. It's interesting till I was like, as you're sitting there, I'm like, wow.
I could guess.
Yeah.
Well, I could guess, but just by the way, knowing how their physical motor development skills have been, like Presley did gymnastics at a really young and was fucking unbelievable. Part of that, I think, comes, the epigenetics, your background in sport. But
and I don't think so.
There's something to be said about that type of exposure, right? That type of vestibular exposure. Because one of the major...
She had it at 3 years old, right? It's you're born. Like, after watching that child develop, I was like, athletes are born. Like,
oh, undoubtedly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think, obviously, there's nothing against you, Benjamin. Sorry, Doc. We'll buy you.
He's amazing in the shirt, right? Just so different.
But I think when you dig into the movement brain and you dig into the processes of motor learning, you realize just how important a finely tuned vestibular ocular apparatus is in sensitizing to the inputs of your external environment, and how important that is in learning fast.
Yeah, it's so like, I just, I take so much wonder in watching my children just like become, like, and sitting back and being the observer is fascinating. And I have so much interest in all children for that reason, because I think they're just this blank canvas, maybe not a blank canvas, but they're born with some predispositions, and watching how some of it's nature and some of it's nurturing, like I can watch them developing these things. And so to watch that grow into an athlete and watch that grow into an academic, and I think just, or a musician, and you're just like, wow, what does that look like from a genomic level, from an environment level? I take so much interest in that.
I think a lot of what I see in athleticism at its peak form is controlling inhibition and mastering inhibition. And I think that's why kids have that ability, is they're not physically conformed to the constraints of being inhibited, right? And so like athleticism is so often measured by the ability to contract.
Sure.
But what you're actually seeing, the space in between the waves.
So it doesn't contract.
The relaxation.
Yeah.
It's how quickly you can relax, right? Both like from an efficiency standpoint, cardiovascularly, your ability to come down, but also you watch athletes that they call as like twitchy, like a running back that just can't be, it's the relaxation and the ability to drop down. And I think at like a neurological level, it's the inundation of inhibitions that we put onto the brain and onto patterns that they have to then unpack to really find athleticism again.
First guy to tell me that was Andy.
Oh, sure.
He was explaining it to me probably 5-7 years ago. And I was sitting there going, he's literally differentiating between this sport and this sport and how it's a cerebellar thing. And these people have smaller cerebellum, therefore they have greater inhibition of the muscular system. It's like, it's so fascinating to just see that manifest.
I think that lends to the analogy. Like Andy's a software engineer, right? Andy O'Brien, because I'm familiar, probably, in my opinion, the most brilliant person in sports science in the entire world. I don't even think it's flawed.
Funny, because I've said that.
Oh, dude,
I was like, oh,
no. Like, and I think two of us with our experience in this world pointing at this guy as like the preeminent leader, I think should give people some indication of just his prowess in this field. I look at a guy like Andy and I go, there's a software engineer. Because the thing is, there are tremendous athletes that Andy's never worked with. And they come by that athleticism through movement interfacing with that underlying CS, right? And it's like, how do you explain it? It's because they just move. And I think this is where subjective experience, like athletes, I think they're hypersensory. Just like a savant is hypersensory, most of them are on some sort of spectrum that is defined by a hypersensory disorder, or hypo in some cases, like a deaf musician, right? Or a blind musician, someone who has a compensatory hypersensitivity due to a lack of input.
Yeah.
So it's like, there are ways to, and some people need that. Some people need the software engineer to come in, but then you see these people that are they're born with a UI, UX to interface with that brain, and the feedback is just feeling. And if it feels good, they do it. And wouldn't you know that, like I can always tell the best athletes when we work in a football setting because they're the ones with the best dance moves.
Right?
Yeah. There's a rhythm, there's a time, and a coordination to it. And a lot of that, again, is driven by inhibition. We pigeonhole the general public's interaction with movement basically under the guise of endurance, intensity, and velocity. But athleticism starts at rhythm, coordination, and time.
What comes to mind for me as you say that is, what does deterministic observation look like when looking at a young athlete when they're 3, 4, 5, and being like, oh, this is your path.
Mm.
Like, you can look at the kinetometrics, you can look at their obviously genome, but you can also look at their predisposition to do certain things that build. Like, I could just imagine a future where it's like you're selected. You're like you're going here. It's from the 70s Russian Olympic teams.
They're into Chinese.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Oh, but like, what are they looking at? How accurately can they determine? If it was successful, the Chinese would be winning more Olympic gold medals. Maybe they just don't have the genome.
What I think the problem is they're running a machine learning model that's informed by the best right now, and are going to be pigeonholed in their ability to find the best in the future by running off of antiquated data that's always full set.
Makes sense,
right?
Yeah.
But I wonder, I don't know if we're up for a sentience AI detour on this podcast, but I wonder if modeling multivariate analysis, and you could go through some sort of like factor analysis, see, okay, which of these, how much redundant data points are we taking? Which are the real ones that are moving the needle? And what are the ones we're not looking at? Could you then model a talent identification system which starts to just pick out?
Guarantee.
Right. Because I think what we see now is a survivorship bias. We're reinforced by the positive behaviors and landmarks along the way in physical motor development.
Survivorship in sport?
Across the board. Yeah. I think powerlifting is a very easy proxy for this one I know well. And it's like there are certain modes of training, or even weightlifting, like the Bulgarian method. It works for those who survive, but it kills so many of their weight. It's like in the weights of that, was there the best athlete of all time in that sport that just wasn't nurtured properly because we were put through this gauntlet run of intensity, right? So I think that's what I mean by survivorship.
Yeah, I did it. Man, I watch it in sports.
Sure.
You see a young athlete and he gets one round coach. My daughter in gymnastics, she quit.
Yeah.
And she had one round coach. And I was like, that could have gone completely differently. And so the best athlete ever born, not saying my daughter's that, but the best athlete ever born was one coach away from setting some new crazy Olympic record, positive and negative. It's so interesting to observe that. She's like, I'm never going back. And I was like, that was that hard. She's like, yep. I was like, okay. Like, what do you do? You're not saying she was it, but like how many other people have lost that along the way to some coach who just didn't know their learning style or their feedback style, So fascinating to think about that.
Yeah. I think we're close. I think we're close at all things biometric. I think psychosocial, we're very far.
That's what I say. Which metric is going to be the limit? Probably the mind. Probably like how do you interface with this person's brain and their mind?
Yeah. I hope we live in a world where that stays interpersonal. I don't want to live in a world where that becomes outsourceable to technology.
Yeah.
Because that's scary.
I agree.
No, because I think that what we set to gain in a faster 100-meter time, we set to lose in humanity.
So one of the hardest things to navigate is a young human, and in this case, young could mean as young as like under 50,
right?
Has no idea how they need to receive feedback, right? You work with an athlete, and you're navigating. I need to give them inputs. And I need to also navigate how they receive feedback, right? Because like as my daughter is an example, physical specimen, receive feedback in the wrong way from a coach, quits. You're working with a physical specimen. You're not giving them the right feedback, whatever that looks like. You could be influencing positively or negatively the trajectory of the rest of their life. And like that sounds like a pretty big statement, but I think it's in reality. So if you can somehow understand how this person best receives feedback, you can completely change the trajectory of their life.
Right. I think the answer to that is not in understand and not as a third party understanding, but to give them the tools for them to understand and communicate.
So it's like it's just feedback.
Yeah.
It's not positive or negative.
I mean, and I agree to my point earlier, like this is what I struggle with, right? Because that thought has an emotion and you embody it to your words, right? So it's like it can be difficult, especially we think of competition and we think we had a little bit of a sidebar about evolution. And it's like this, it's funny. I made this point the other day about bodybuilding, fertility, and the role of competition in the power of competition on physiology. And, to get some of the Cole's notes first, but a bodybuilder will take, exogenous hormones. We understand the detriment to the reproduction, but they're all really confused why out of a competition, they are able to conceive. And it's like competition is the fitness function of our evolution, which still exists, right? Like that to me is, you want to talk about an act that is user interfaces with the human physiology in a way that changes our reward system, our hardware, our ability to learn. It's like, I think we misrepresent the role of failure. And I think what we mean when people say, oh, you need to learn how to fail. You embrace your failures. You need to fail forward. It's not failure. It's error. It's error. And competition closes that error feedback so unbelievably fast. So many times, really as often and as frequent and at a magnitude to which you can tolerate. Competition will allow it.
Isn't it amazing how the English language, I only know this one, the poverty of language influences our perception of things so often. Like, well, we're using the word failure because there's probably the absence of the accurate word in that case, or someone's ability to think like, oh no, it's not failure, it's error. And that, the whole society has adopted failure as the common lingo, but it's not failure at all, it's error. But we don't have the depth of thought to use that.
Yeah. I mean, one of my favorite quotes is the limits of our language is the limits of our world.
Yeah.
Right. And it's crazy. It's funny because like we can bring this kind of back into maybe our domain of expertise rather than our vocation, but like oftentimes criticized is the intellectual bodybuilder that seeks to use frontal, transverse, and sagittal, right? Like, oh God, forbid we use it.
What are you going to be on for this podcast?
And it's, like, and I think as long as people find, and not as long, like I hope that they find something that's worth exploring to that depth. Whether if it's not bodybuilding or biomechanics, cool. Like that's why I totally understand where this stuff gets boring. Yeah, I gotta make, Harry Potter references and compare it to Gate Cycle just to keep people's attention. Like I understand that it's boring, but it's like, the whitewashing of the nuance is like, well, that's where all the value is, right? Like this idea that you have to be able to explain it to a 4-year-old. What? No, you don't. One of my favorite quotes of all time, and I've adapted it to our world. Neil deGrasse Tyson, sort of like famous astrophysicist, commentator, director of the Hayden Planetarium, if I'm not mistaken. I forget where I heard it, but he was like, look, the universe is under no obligation to make sense to you, right? It's like trying to figure out like the holographic effect of the surface of a black hole or a singularity. It's like, no, it doesn't make any sense. Or like even the beginning of space-time and the Big Bang and all that stuff, or Planck's constant or whatever, like the end of space-time. Really had to make no sense. This thing, I'm sorry. Is it's of no obligation to make sense to you.
You know, one of the first quotes you said to me, like 2017, circa. Oh no, was like, I was like, man, you know, the language you use is like really hard to interpret sometimes, really hard to receive. And I'm like, if you just like used easier language, people would be more likely to take to your teaching. Like, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to do that. And they need to come up to my level because of nuance and specificity. And I was like, interesting. Like just sort of looking back, I remember that vividly because you always use big words and I'm like, no, they're just accurate. But at the time I was like, this is, you know, do you want to have the mass appeal or the mass attraction? And like, if you talk to a third grade level, more people would kind of jump on board. And you're like, no, man, like if I'm going to teach, people need to come up to, I think it was when we were traveling, I said that.
Yeah. It's,
I would often just be like, here's what he says. And I'm like, because I didn't understand it. Sometimes I was like, no, I think I get it.
I'd rather use long words than big sentences.
Right.
One of my favorite stories, and it's an anecdote that I use a lot in teaching because I push coaches on this because I think the ability to titrate language. Now, I think what I've learned from that since then is there are instances where the third grade version is helpful for everyone.
Yep.
Rather than me just, you know, coming off of a graduate degree and beating my chest as someone who felt entitled to something. Now it's like, I'm not trying to send a message. I'm trying to achieve an outcome. So there was a weapons seizure close to where my parents live, a couple blocks away. And it was the most Windsor shit of all time. And I tell this as a story. And I think it's a useful thing to understand. And amongst the weapons seized, there was a bunch of them, was a 22, a sawed-off shotgun, and an M72 single-shot rocket launcher. And I thought, this guy gets communication. This guy understands communication, right? Like, that's it. And I challenge, you know, sometimes you can't always exclude for the people in the room. So, like, I'll be in rooms where there are people who can go, you know, RPG for RPG with an M72 single-shot rocket launcher. I often find myself in rooms now working in different spaces and echelons of our industry where I'm speaking with, you know, double board certified orthopedic surgeons that are rehabbing patients of mine that need the best in the entire world. And if I come in talking like a 2-year-old, like, yeah, right. So, but there are rooms where I'm in that are a little bit more easygoing. It's a panel. It's a fireside chat or whatever this new trend is. It's like some conference somewhere where you're like, I don't need to come in here and blow the room to pieces. Like I need a little 22. No, you know, nothing's got to re-drywall. We just put a couple holes in it. We make our point and we get out. So I challenge people to, as they learn concepts, learn them to those levels. And then, because I think what has allowed me to really find the enjoyment in what I do is there's an orthogonality to learning where it's like you have this depth and this breadth, and the depth comes from the subject matter, but the breadth comes from the ability to communicate it. But it's like, for me, it was really easy to focus on this. Like I can have a conversation with a room full of 100 people who aren't saying anything to me because I could dig deep. Right. I don't need to worry about the next question. I don't need to worry about, you know, someone interjecting.
Yeah, I think what's happened, it's what it seems like happened, because I know this is going on with me at the same time at a different level, is in the beginning, the measure of success is, am I able to complete the teaching of this course? Now it's, am I able to complete the teaching of this course and have the highest percentage of people actually understand what the hell I'm trying to say?
Right.
Yeah, so it's a different measure of success.
I think you have to go through one to get the other.
For sure.
Right. Like, because I think you need to hone the subject matter to leave yourself open to everything else that's being said. That's not being said.
Well, media language is like, first I need to learn to squat. Second, I need to learn to squat well.
Right.
Or like, and you know, add levels of depth.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool, man. I think we met on some interesting tangents, man. As we should just leave the lights on and just like stumble in here every 3 years.
Yeah, it's a time capsule. It'd be nice. I'm going to go back and listen to our old one now.
Yeah.
I want to do one on acid. I think that would be a trip, quite literally.
Maybe we do a walking podcast.
Yeah.
Man, I appreciate you. It's always great to catch up, even though it feels like a blur. Right. Jordan's just kind of passing through.
Yeah.
I'm sure one day that'll change. It'll all come full circle. And one of the things that I want, we've had the opportunity the last couple of weeks to sit down for dinner, and it's interesting to be able to kind of like look back and reflect on your life and see how far you've come and allow you to interact, or allow my son to interact with you. That's been one of my favorite exchanges, even though it's minimal, because I see so many of his traits or your traits in him, and he's not you, but the level of depth, I can't keep up with his thinking, which sounds crazy, but he's 13 years old. I can't keep up with my son's thinking. The first time you and I had a conversation here, I couldn't keep up with your thinking. I was like, interesting. Like I need to like keep up my brain speed and my lingo. Like, so my son's the same. I'm like, you guys need to be in the same room although I'm completely frightened, batshit crazy. They're like, Jordan can't be in a room with this kid alone.
You know what? I think the next podcast is me and Benjamin.
Dude, it would
be lights out, man.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
That kid blows my mind so often. Anyways, man, I love you.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you.
That's a wrap, ladies and gents. Check us out at muscleintelligence.com. Check this guy out at prescript.com.
That's it.
We'll link to his amazing stuff and so much more in the show notes.